This is the District Facility Plan Part 3, Understanding Your Orientation Packet Information, everyone. I'm John Gilbert again with District Facilities Branch, and we have had two other parts. If you've not had the opportunity, they can be found on our website, which I will get to here shortly to show you how to get there. Just some really quick introductions. Probably know most of these players and most of these people. Obviously, this is through the Department of Education, through the Office of Finance and Operations, our Associate Commissioner Robin Kinney, through the district or the Division of District Support. Che Ritter is the division director there. Greg Dunbar manages District Facilities Branch, which in turn has four architects here at the department: Gary Lease, James Bauman, Marcus Highland, and myself, John Gilbert. We also have Tanisha Keene, who is the glue to our team. She is our resource management analyst number 2. And also Oksana, who you heard maybe shortly just before this presentation. She is our project manager for all things, in particular for KFIX and presentations like this. Just to kind of give you a lowdown on the summary here, this presentation will focus primarily on part 2 of the orientation packets, but I will touch on a couple of things for part 1. Um, We've gotten some updated information. Part twos, for those of you who have seen a lot of these, are going to start looking a little bit different. Part ones that we will currently give out will still be the older part ones. However, there is some information that we're going to give you to kind of update a couple of different spots in that presentation until we have the time and the resources to update that part 1. And I'll explain here shortly. So kind of going through orientation part 1. The orientation is a video presentation that we at the Department of Education provided a few years ago. James Bauman does that presentation, uh, and he goes over at a high level the orientation process. He goes over things like our mission statement that talks about us helping to provide to wisely help assess your schools, to provide adequate and equitable facilities to go through that process. There's an overview and history part of that part 1 presentation that talks about constitutional law and the reasons for why we do what we do. I'm not going to get into those today because that overall that's a really good presentation to kind of go through all these things at a high level. It's good for your local planning committee to know that information. It's good for your school board to know those things as well, and also your third-party architects and fiscal agents and those who are helping you as a team come up with your facility plan. We also talk about best practices. One of the things that we do need to make a change on, we currently, when we send you out this part 1 for your review and use with your LPC in that first kickoff meeting, there is a component called cost per square foot as replacement values. RS Means has changed and they no longer publish that information. I'll touch on that in the next slide here shortly. We have updated that a little bit, but the presentation itself has not been updated. But we are in the works to try to get that to you. There's also adequacy of talking about model programs, like what classrooms are and the like, and what model program means for your school district. You have a basic kitchen, cafeteria, a number of classrooms for number of students and things like that. And then it goes through a very quick step-by-step process, which we've done in previous ones in greater detail, and also provides talking about the architect engineering evaluation and goes into greater detail about fund sources. So the changes that we need to talk about that are not changed yet in that part 1 presentation is the RS Means. On our website, if you're familiar with our website, we have the statement that you see before you. The same information we use for additions and new schools for a cost per square foot is what we used to use was RS Means construction data. That was in the regulation, which we're in the process of making that adjustment. And we've had to change that because that information is just simply no longer available. and we would update that information, provide soft costs, and periodically update that. Generally, I believe once a year. Now, and it's as listed on our website, we've utilized that information, but we update through what is called FRED, the Federal Reserve Economic Data information. It's periodically updated. It comes from a publication, I believe, called the Producer Price Index for new building construction. This helps determine those inflationary costs as we move forward in each respective year. If you have questions on where to find this information, please feel free to call any of your project managers or call our facilities branch, and we'll show you where that cost per square foot items that we currently use for planning and insurance replacement costs are on our website. Now, a large part of what this orientation presentation is going to be about is part two. Uh, this is getting from a high level, your part one, again, is self-explanatory when you go through that process, to part two, which is district-specific information. I would like to thank Dr. Fletcher out there. He's allowed me to use Lawrence County as an example. We recently did their part two and updated it with the appearance of more of the KDE standard backgrounds and backdrops, if you will, and provided their presentation. What you're going to see is essentially what that LPC sees for theirs, and you would in turn get for your particular school district, where we manually put this information together on district provided information to the state. To provide this information to your LPC in a meaningful way. This is important information that can help you make decisions and determinations for your district as you move forward. Uh, it starts out with a cover not unlike this. This one was created at the beginning of September. It tells you welcome back, assuming that you've gone through part one presentation and you're going through a part two. Most districts will have a separate meeting for part one and part two. Some people will have both meetings or both parts in the same meeting. That's certainly a local decision, and there's some flexibility in there on how you want to do that. But this presentation focuses on the information specific to your district, which includes an overview of capacity calculations. How do we determine how many classrooms you need for 600 students and things like that? It shows information from your current district facility plan when the department and what used to be the Kentucky Board of Education, I apologize before I get too far into part two. Part one, the other thing that is in a part one presentation is we go over not only just the RS means information has changed that we need to tell you about in part one, but also there's a example. I think it's about 17 minutes into that presentation that talks about the Kentucky Board of Education approves your district facility plans. They still receive this information, but now the Department of Education approves your district facility plan. And a lot of that has come up from House Bill 678 that was approved and enacted in law on April 8th of this year, requiring that when we get a complete district facility plan, we have 30 days to respond to the district and give an approval or a disapproval of the final plan. And we've talked more about that at previous ones as well. But just to let you know, when you show that part one presentation, those are the two things that will need to change. The rest of the information in there is pretty good. And those two things, we're going to try to draft something to give you that information so that when you're showing your LPC, you can inform them until such a time that we can update that information. So kind of back to part two here. Apologize for that. Um, uh, we'll go over your current district facility plan. This is on the KDE website. Again, we can show you where that is. If it's on our website, it is your official district facility plan that has been approved, typically by the Board of Education and now the Department of Education. So we go through that. We kind of explain that. The details of that are in part one. The details for your district plan are in this part two. And then we talk about projects that have been undertaken since your last DFP. For Lawrence County, the last one they had was 2018. So we look in our system, we look at all the BG numbers, and there's a component in the part two that talks about projects undertaken, basically those projects that basically remove need from your current district facility plan. So if you have a $50 million district facility plan and you've done lots of additions and renovations, your need has been reduced over that time. You're accomplishing your goals as a district. And this is informing the LPC what you've done in the past and what is happening. Uh, we also touch on the district restricted funding stream. While the definitions are given in part one, we go over what those are as reported to the state, with some caveats that you really need to talk to your fiscal agent. We don't talk about SFCC funds, but we talk a lot about the availability to pay bonds through that those particular funding streams through capital outlay, FSPK, and others. Also in this presentation, you go over school center information, cost of delivery of services. Some of this information is provided from the district's to in school report card. We utilize that information and show it in a presentation like this for your LPC to look at. And you'll see that as we go through. Also, one thing, and I will tell you, having been through a number of these meetings at LPCs, enrollment changes since 1990. If there's one place a LPC likes to stop on, it's that slide. People really see, district reported information about what your enrollment was at the end of a given year from 1990 till now. Uh, uh, really shows what those changes are in a real way, and may also help to project what you're going to do over the next 4 to 6 or more years. We also go a little bit further. We have demographic projections based on, and we just received this, and at the last week in August, we have seen that the University of Louisville's data center has updated the 2020 census information in August. So from part twos from this time on, if you're getting them from September on, you should be getting the updated census data as we move forward. And you'll see that as I move on. So this is the summary of that presentation. We're going to look at what Lawrence County's information is. Again, all these slides you see would be things that you would see for your presentation, except it would have your district specific information. First, the overview, building capacities, existing building conditions in Lawrence County for this example. The first part talks about, you know, in the part one presentation, they talk about model program and sizing up a building, if you will. When you look at capacity calculations and how we see that, we look at it in two different ways. We look at it primarily through the regulation 4180, which incorporates the planning manual, which provides the table that you see to the right. We have it for elementary schools on this slide, and in the next slide, it's for middle and high schools. Basically, when you look at this, I think the biggest takeaway for your LPC when you have discussions on this, because your architects, ourselves, and others will be able to analyze this information as you're putting together what additions you need or what kind of school you need and the like. When you look at classroom size for an elementary school, I'm just going to give this as one example. The ideal classroom size in the planning manual is 800 square feet for 25 students. That's how we assess it. That is what is per regulation and the through the planning manual. So when we assess a building and we look at these sizes, we look at a classroom for the designated number of students. Now there is a how low can you go, if you will, 562 square feet, that's pretty low. If you get under that, we don't consider it adequate, if you will, for counting as a standard classroom. You may have some like that, but when we look at it for an assessment standpoint, we would expect it to be above that threshold for an elementary school. But probably the biggest takeaway to kind of wrap this up is if we're looking at it as one classroom for 25 students, from a local standpoint, you're likely looking at it as one teacher for 25 students, especially at an elementary level. If your district has a policy of a teacher to student ratio that's less than that, that does not change the state requirement when we look at that. So keep that in mind when you're talking to your LPC. These two particular sides, that's really important information for you to consider. Your classroom sizes, you make the local decisions on how you do that. But when it comes to planning for facilities and capturing restricted fund sources, this is the regulation. This is what we look at, and this is how we analyze that. The same can be said for middle and high school. It's a little bit different here. I'm just to kind of move on. I'm not going to get too labored into this, but to say, at the middle and high school levels, you have other activities. You have specialized educational programs. You have band. You have agriculture programs. You have, uh, uh, shop classes, if you will, where it changes a little bit. So for one classroom, you still have 720 square feet to, it's 750 square feet, if you will, at the middle and high school levels, excuse me, as an optimum level, one classroom for 25 students in terms of fitting those 25 students. But you have to imagine we divide that by 75% because it's really a classroom for every 33 students. The additional students are assumed to be in other rooms like a music classroom, a band classroom, or wherever, because those rooms are equally used for classroom or homeroom type scenarios. That is the regulation. That's where those items are. So if that helps, it's not that you would typically have 33 and a third students. If you would, you ideally in a perfect setting, you would have 25 students in a classroom with 8 more students that would feasibly be that could be in that classroom, but would likely be in a music room or other type of extracurricular activity, for lack of a better description. So existing conditions for large scale. This one's a little bit new, and I'm going to be honest and transparent. This is still a little bit of a work in progress. This particular slide. This particular slide is letting you have the opportunity to talk about existing conditions. If you have your design professional come to this particular meeting, this is a good opportunity to review those existing conditions. If you've got 3 or 4 schools, they may say, hey, this is a brand new school. We don't need to spend any time on it. This elementary school's 60, 70 years old. It's in needs. Here are the deficiencies and what do you want to do with it? It's a good opportunity to look at those things. Do you need renovation work? Does a school need a new roof? Do you need to add something like a new system? I mean, do you have an elementary school that does not have an HVAC system in the building? That's introducing a new system altogether into that building. Your design professionals will be able to better speak to that as they are required to evaluate your buildings prior to putting your plan together. Model program space comparisons. Do you have too many classrooms? Do you not have enough classrooms? Again, that goes back to the capacity calculations I talked about briefly. And having those conversations with your LPC is really important to determine how that works. Just understand that we look at it based on how I just explained that and other improvements to meet KDE standards. Your design professionals will also look at other standards like building code requirements, ADA requirements, and the like to get your buildings up to their best uh, uh, capabilities to better serve your students. The next component of the part two that we show districts is the current district facility plan. This is literally taking from the KDE website and there's each slide talks about the priority and what that priority means, and then follows it up with the actual facility plan areas as an example, so that your LPC could look at this. They could be refreshed. If this is a second meeting, then maybe going over priority 1A through F that was mentioned in part 1 might not be fresh in their memories. We talk about those things. So the first part of your DFP, however, shows the date your last DFP was approved, whether it was by the Department of Education or by KVE, your proposed plan of organization. Are you a P through 6 school and a 7, 8 and a 9 through 12, or are you a P through 2? 3 through 6 grades, and then 7 through 9 or 10 through 12. Again, those are local decisions, but they uh, are huge implications in terms of how your buildings operate and function. And that is shown and illustrated on these plans. School centers, one thing that we're adding and we have been adding for the past year or more is their classifications. You won't see that on old plans, and you won't see that on Lawrence County's old plan I'm about to scroll to here, but we are incorporating that, and school district personnel may know these better than some of the design professionals out there. A1s, A2s, it's the type of school center that you have, and those kind of directly correlate to a whole host of other things, not just facilities, but other things that school districts are concerned about that obviously I'm not going to get into for this presentation. Um, each school status is a permanent or transitional facility. Again, that's touched on in part one in terms of definitions, just to say that permanent facilities are facilities that qualify to show renovations, additions, or needs for construction for restricted funding purposes to be permitted to be on the facility plan. Transitional is a school district that's made a conscious decision to say this particular building we're not going to make any more improvements on because we have a new plan for it, whether it's replacing it with a new building, whether it's getting rid of that building and redistricting, again a local decision, not a facilities branch decision here, but dispersing those kids into other schools. It is acknowledging through the planning process that what you currently have active as school centers and their permanent or transitional status, it is giving that framework so that as you see the projects through the rest of the plan, you've got that information to know where these things are going. Also, we provide grades level served for each school, which goes back to the plans of organization. Those two should align, or some at least, if not identical, very close. Um, and then any end of year enrollment to building capacities, which will have been reviewed as part of the process. End of year enrollment is typically through the superintendent's annual attendance report. That's the SAR that you may hear of for those of you who are familiar, or the student report card information that's also available. Both have district reported information. Both are where we glean information from to provide this part too. Um, so, for example, Lawrence County, they have this looks like every facility plan in the state almost. They had a KBE approval date of December 2018. Their next one is due right now, and they are actively looking at this process right now. They had a finding on theirs, and they showed the plan of organizations where it says current plan and long range plan, shows what they plan on doing for each school center and facilities, and then shows the school centers and what their status is, whether they're permanent, which you should see on here, and if they're transitional, then in this particular plan, this is the existing plan. This is not the plan that they make. You do this part two, you look through it. This shows you the existing plan. You're in the process of making a new one, so it may be different than what this one looks like. And then again, student enrollment capacity, and those numbers are checked, and we will often comment on those when we do our reviews. The main body of the DFP focus on district need and construction projects and property and the like, identified by your LPC and shows work in one of the priorities. A fifth priority is listed also. Uh, Priority one projects. Again, each priority one and two have letter designations A through F. The first presentation goes over there in greater detail, but to kind of recap in a very quick fashion, A's are for new schools. If I'm a growth district and I've got more kids than I've got schools and I'm adding a new elementary school, 1A is what you would typically list that new elementary school as. If it's a B, you're replacing a school. If I've got a 70-year-old school and I'm replacing it, it would typically be a priority 1B. Uh, 1Cs are for major renovations and additions. You have an existing school that's 30, 40 years old, maybe even 60 years old. Maybe there's some historical needs that you like at that school that you're going to keep it longer term. But in C, you would primarily show your renovations and then list those renovations or describe those renovations, provide those pricings, and also have additions listed. D, E, and F are typically for more single system type setups, if you will, or for specific needs. Uh, D is like the Kentucky Education Reform Act back from the 90s. You'll talk about SBDM council rooms and things like that, um, life safety, and we've also incorporated security as a district sees fit under Priority E and then ADA requirements. There's better definitions in the planning manual, but I'm going to move on from here. This kind of gives you a general overview. Priority 2 is the exact same. It's just Priority 2 instead of Priority 1. Priority 1 is saying you're going to do it within the next 2 years or biennium, if you will. Priority 2 is after that. So for um, um, Lawrence County, they have a new school on their Priority 1B. That they also had a new local area vocational education center. That new center also had some renovation additions as part of the school. It's a little more complex. Probably should have been listed as a C, but 1B, 1C, this one kind of got into both those categories. Going to priorities 1C, you have Blaine Elementary and Fallsburg that are shown. It gives you a description of the renovations and then calls out by line items each addition that would qualify for that particular school. So you would have a renovation total number like a 4,857,000 in this example, and then each line item for the particular additions. Also, priorities, continues on down through 1C, 1D. Your district would also have this. Priorities 2 would also have that. Priority 3 gets a little different. And to be honest, we don't see a lot of priority 3s, although we do see them from time to time. If you've got a school that's got a media center, or you have a district-wide kitchen set up, or maybe you're a larger school district, or you've got some need to have a kitchen that supplies food to multiple schools and not at each specific school, or you've got gymnasium only needs at a school and you're not doing anything else to that building, this is a good location to list those kind of priorities as priority 3. Um, if you had instructional space or things like that, you would typically list those things in with priorities 1 and 2. But if they're standalone, auditoriums are a popular one that we see under priority 3. This is an example of where you'd do that. And for example, Lawrence County has an auditorium listed under priority 3 that you see at the bottom of that slide. Priority 4 is your district support services. Currently, Lawrence County doesn't have an example of that, but your central office, your bus garage, and the like is where you would have that information. At the bottom of a district facility plan, just before you get to priority 5, we've always listed priorities 1 through 4 as the established district need. Now, this is important on a couple of different levels. It gives your LPC, your community, your administration, your school board. This is our district need. This is totaling up all those things I showed you. This is the need that qualifies for restricted funds at various levels. And you've identified this on your facility plan. So you've got in this example from their 2018 plan, they had a $47.5 million need reported. That in turn goes on a report that we do every other year for the LRC that goes towards the legislators when they make their views. So it's important that when you finish your plan and once it's approved, this information goes towards that. Um, Priority 5 projects are typically minor projects. They're items that didn't qualify for priorities 1 through 4. Often it's extracurricular facilities, buildings too new to qualify for restricted funds, and the like. Um, this is typically not presented as part of the total district need, and they had examples of that at Lawrence County. Um, Now, House Bill 678, uh, just to kind of touch on that, to kind of go back to the previous slide, extracurricular facilities we've always put in priority 5. However, with House Bill 678, and a memo from KDE on May 22nd that I believe that went out to superintendents to reiterate what HB 678 notes. If you place extracurricular under anything other than priority 5, uh, you can do that. The law is allowing you to provide that information, but you need to provide. So if you want to put it in a priority 1 through 4, you may, per HB 678. But it's to be of an extracurricular nature, and we would ask that you provide examples of what that is when you submit a facility plan. So if it's a Kentucky High School Athletic Association formal program, or something that, football, archery, esports, whatever the like may be, provide us that information so we know what it is you're providing. We would also have those items that are related to 678 called out as individual items on a facility plan. It would look like an addition item, if you will, for House Bill 678, and we will literally note House Bill 678 beside it. So let's say you did an athletic facility, just to kind of be generic about it, and you wanted to put it under priority 1 or 2. While we highly encourage you to put that under 5, the law certainly allows you to put that in a higher priority. And when you do that, provide the evidence that you're doing it per qualifying uh, items, and also know that it would look like an addition on your facility plan. So, like, it would have its own separate line item. In part because House Bill 678 has a deadline of June 24th, 2024, and we do not want to know what the future holds. We do not have a crystal ball, and so we're trying to be proactive in showing how that's showing on facility plans to meet the requirements of the law, and also provide you all with options to do so. Uh, and let's see, moving on to projects undertaken since 2018 for Lawrence County. Yours might be 17 or 19 or 16. If you're behind, you might be in the 16 range or other. But building and grounds, or BG projects that we all know them as, reported to KDE. We assess what you've done since your last facility plan, and we provide you with that information in this chart. So we basically look through our system. We look at the fact pack system, and we provide that work and that effort and what those actual costs are. So, for example, Lawrence County has got projects from 2018 to 2022. You see the BG numbers on the left, the priorities that where needs may have been met. you know, there are other reasons to have BG numbers that aren't necessarily just DFP priorities. So that's why you'll see none on a couple of these. Maybe they've required an architect, engineer, design professional to do that work. We show you all those needs, and we show you what that project is and give you a total final cost uh, um, of what the district has done. So from an LPC perspective, they see what the administration and school board's done. Hey, we do have a DFP. They have done work, and there's some meaning behind that. It gives you tangible evidence that the process is working at the local level if work's been done. All right, the district's restricted funding streams. Um, the definitions of a lot of this go through part 1. I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly. All funding sources need to be considered during the DFP start process. Include information from or invite your physical agent and district finance officer to discuss this portion of the presentation. I highly advise that. I highly encourage it. I don't know that it's a requirement, but it's highly advisable. I find a lot more meaning, having been to a number of these meetings, to have that information, because the information we provide does not necessarily deal with SFCC funds or those availabilities. And that's the most restrictive fund source, if you will. And we may not have all the district's financial information to be able to tell you the full scope. We give you, through capital outlay, FSPK, and some of those resources, the ability to have funds to pay off bonds over time. But we don't have the full picture. So this kind of just gives you that picture, if you will. So types of restricted funding for schools, Again, part one, we'll go over this a little bit more detail than I am going to here, but we give you a little refresher in the part two so that if your fiscal agent's there, they can maybe touch on the capital outlay, where it's a population-based fund source and how that's determined, you know, through that process or average daily attendance and things like that. There's property assessment, where building funds and growth levies through the facility support program of Kentucky, that's the FSPK that you hear of, and we have the regulatory or the statutory numbers there, if you will, about where these laws are coming from through the KRS numbers you see. And then, of course, there's qualified needs based, which is your more restrictive fund sources of SFCC or the School Facilities Construction Commission, and the urgent needs as determined by legislators through those processes. So, funds through the population property assessments are considered through the Supporting Educational Excellence in Kentucky program, or SEEK. And that information, again, is on the KDE website. We provide it in this presentation um, so your LPC can see this, and your board, who should also be seeing this part two information. Again, on the website, the information provided is the pupil, the property assessments, and the aggregate daily attendance, if you will, which affects the FSPK and capital outlay numbers. It also goes over the taxation of the Nichols calculations and what's available. And again, all this information is on the website and is public information. Your SFCC funds, Lawrence, the qualified needs-based funding. The unadjusted DFP calculated district need, this is a slide that we have in there, totals for Lawrence County, the 47.5 million, including projects that have been completed or underway. We don't take out the projects done because the planning number versus those numbers may be slightly different. Like I said, some of those did not necessarily take out um, uh, DFP related work. So that is something that you can discuss, whether it's your superintendent or your facility director or someone that maybe wants to touch on that. This information simply tells you what your total need is that was qualifying. It also tells you that this total equates to $19,432 per student based on the 2019 enrollment of 2,443 students for this particular school. So you basically, how much need you define versus what, trying to look at it on a per student basis. And again, urgent needs are by legislators. All sources need to be considered. We provide this slide, and again, really getting down to it, this is talking about current funding streams and the information that I just showed you about capital outlay and FSPK. This is a little formulaic chart that essentially I would encourage you to have a fiscal agent around or your finance officer to kind of touch base more on this information. But you can talk about capital outlay, FSPK, those nickels that you have, the assessments of your properties and the like. This information is simply provided that we have on our website. If some of these things have changed, you may want to double check where they are in their status. These are the current projections that we have in our system. And it equates to what you see on your screen in the purple box is the total funds available annually for debt service from FSPK and capital outlay. We do not include the SFCC, but that tells you what your baseline is for where you stand possibly on what you can afford from a bond standpoint. We sometimes add an additional nickel, if you will, which is often recallable. As of right now, I'm not aware of anything that where there's matching nickels or anything like that. Currently, the legislators aren't providing anything like that. So this just shows you from a conversation standpoint, is that a significant thing from a district level that you want to consider? School center information and cost of delivery of services. This next section, we talk about the framework for for your new DFP, if you will, the enrollment data from the superintendent's annual attendance report, which are end of year, and the cost of delivery of services. Now, in the cost of delivery of services, there's a lot of information you're going to see that looks familiar to the very top of your facility plan. So you're going to see that and know that if you utilize that information, you've already begun filling out your new one based on that updated information. So when you look at cost of delivery of services, in this component here, we look at all your schools, basically your school centers. And when you look at these right here, this would be on the top of your facility plan, and you would list your school centers, like for example, Lawrence County High School, Louisa Middle School, Blaine Elementary, Fallsburg, Louisa East, and Louisa West Elementary. There's a school classification in parentheses. All of those are A1 schools, which are essentially like your P through 12 type schools, if you will. The status of what those are on the current DFP are listed, what grade configurations they are. Sometimes from a facility plan to what we have right here, we'll get that information from school report card. That may change. Districts may have made a conscious decision to do something that didn't impact um, construction, but may have impacted where grades are. That will impact your future plan because we need to know how that will be going forward from a construction standpoint. That's not always one to one. It's not always an automatic, uh, uh, pass on to the next four-year period, if you will. So that gets checked through the grade configuration. End of year enrollment, yes, we have been using 2019. There's been a freeze on that from a financial standpoint, and it is primarily from the superintendent's annual attendance report. There are some odd exceptions every now and then, like if you've had a school close and you've dispersed kids, we may use the school report card information as a substitute, if you will. The two are fairly synonymous with each other, but sometimes for consistency, we try to use SAR every time as much as we can, but we will go to the report card when needed. Capacity. This is checked from our perspective. We try to check this before sending this out. Sometimes we end up checking it, to be perfectly honest, when we get to evaluating your facility plan, the draft DFP, when you get it to us. If we can get this information to you, that capacity should match on your DFP, so you know where you stand when you fill this information out. So, for example, Lawrence County High School, if you remember the top part of that DFP of the existing one, should have an end of year enrollment of 707 with a capacity of 700, and showing that they were just a little bit over in this assessment at this time. But you also look at the other schools and the number of students versus the capacity of the reported building. Again, the capacity comes from the Kentucky Facilities Inventory Classification System primarily. Lawrence County has filled that information out. That shows you the enrollment to capacity. A lot of their elementary schools are not at that 100% capacity like you see at the middle and high schools. So also what we provide is a cost per pupil delivery. Again, this is reported information from the district, what it costs. Those numbers may have more than just maintenance associated with them, but it shows you what costs are occurring at the at each school. What's the one that's costing the least based on district reported information, and which one's costing more, and what theoretical annual savings can you have if you look at those through the course of a given year. That's important. Maybe some of your older schools might be costing more to maintain and upkeep and keep clean. If there are notes to be had, they will be listed based on your specific situation. They're not always there. Sometimes you don't necessarily have notes, but in this instance, we did, and there's usually something on that slide that will have any unique situations if that's the case. Enrollment changes. This is usually typically one slide, and like I said earlier, this is a slide that really touches on um, that I see more LPC spend more time on because someone may say, well, that's the year I graduated. And wow, we've increased or lost a lot of students since then. This ends up being your end of year information. Oh, so In this example, we've got Lawrence County. You can look at what their enrollment was in 1989-90 school year through, well, we show 2020, 2021 in this example. Sometimes we try to highlight the high point and the low point, uh, but you can analyze and utilize this information as you see fit from an LPC standpoint. Again, this is district provided information. It's enrollment history. It shows you where those numbers are on a year-to-year basis, and where you stand as a district in gains and losses. You know, the bottom is kind of in yellow because again, there was the freeze for the 2019 from a funding standpoint. The official numbers when you get into the COVID are not as defined, unfortunately, for the pandemic we've all had to go through. So, just trying to keep that in mind. And then the last thing that we really touch on is demographic projections. And like I said, this is the first one that we've utilized 2020 census numbers. We've been utilizing University of Louisville has a data center who releases information and periodically updates projections based on the United States Census that happens every 10 years. We've had the 2010 we've been utilizing up until August or September of this year, I'm sorry. University of Louisville had released this according to their website in August of this year. So we are just now taking that information and utilizing it for those demographic projections. Again, this is census information and it's U of L data center uh, 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 creating projections for those numbers. So you should get something like this, whether it's Lawrence County or Fulton County or Pike County or Fayette County or whomever. Everybody should have an overall presentation that looks not much different than what you've looked at, and the same would come of this particular um, uh, spreadsheet here, if you will. So for Lawrence County, we typically highlight in yellow ages 5 through 19. That's just how the process works. I mean, obviously, a lot of your kids maybe a little bit in the 4 range or more in the 18 range. That's where we're looking at those numbers from Lawrence County as a focus for age group. But we also try to do some analysis about how you look at all age groups in the upcoming slide. When you look at Lawrence County as an example, if you look at 2010 and 2020, which are actual census numbers, you have 100 people as a gain from ages 5 to 19. That's not a huge gain or loss over a 10-year period. And when you look at the 5-year increments, you're gaining 1% or losing 1%. It's relatively plus or minus 1% here when you look at this particular scenario. Other districts will have, of course, very different numbers. Some will have gains, some will have losses. Then as you get down, you'll see ages 20 through 64, your working population, if you will, and we do the same for that about where you gain or lose. In this example, there are mostly losses from the working uh, 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 age groups, if you will. And then we break that down from 65 to 85 and older. And what gains or losses do you have there? In this example, you have, gains with overtime settling back in as well. Um, let's see. Then we try to sum that up, if you will. So in this example, Lawrence County school enrollment from 1990 to 2010, while their age population from the U of L data centers showed not a significant up or down for ages 5 to 19, the enrollment of the actual school did show decline from 2010 or from but from 2010 to 2019, there was a little change. There was a big change from 1990 to 2021, but not so big of a change for the last 10 years, which is consistent with the census in this sense. A lot of school districts will have some decline, but Lawrence County seem to be steady based on all the numbers we're seeing. We also give you some assessment about what your area development district is expected to have. The U of L Data Center has that information through the 5CO or the 5 counties area development district. They're projecting decreases over that time. Um, for Lawrence County, there's an overall decrease. And then the population projections of Kentucky, our previous one had more of an 8% increase. That's tapered down a little bit to a 6% increase over time when you look at the state as a whole. So, that's pretty much, what sums up our presentation. We end with how will you wisely deal with the projected student populations and funding needed to run your school system. And all this information is, I feel, important for your LPC to consider as they make their draft DFP for our review and eventual submittal to your board for a final approved DFP. With that, I think I took nearly the whole hour. I'm done. Um, Tanisha or Oksana, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'm happy for us to take questions. And as we answer them, Greg, Gary, or anyone else part of the crew can certainly feel free to help me answer those.
I've got one question here available. One thing someone's asking is if they can get a copy of the presentation, which I believe is going to be available. But we have a
Yes.
question from Valerie Wilcox, and she wants to know if you need a BG1 for projects not on the DFP.
That's a good question. Projects, yes. There are typically, and I'm going off the top of my head here, so Greg, feel free to chime in if I miss something here, but there are generally 4 requirements for a BG1. If you're meeting district facility plan needs is one. So like if you're doing construction work that's on DFP, and to remove that need from our systems and to accurately report what you're doing as a district, you need to do a BG1 for that. If you have a project that requires a design professional, that's part of KRS, I believe, 322 and 323 requirements. If you need a design professional, you would need to fill out a BG1. Um, and there's 2 others. If you change your model program to a school, which is oftentimes a district facility plan need being met, but on rare occasion, it may not be. But if you're changing your model program in a building as a result of construction, we would want to know that. And help me out here, Greg. I'm missing
Well,
at least
if they're
one here.
proposing to use restricted funds.
Yes, any restricted fund use. Thank you. I knew I was missing one out there. Any restricted fund use, which is the primary need for the DFP. But there are certainly projects out there that you may have certain restricted fund sources of varying types that not necessarily removing a need from a DFP, but qualify for such. You would need to report that to us.
This is Gary. I would like to add that the requirements for requiring a DFP are listed in 702 KR 4160, with the exception of what doesn't list under 160 is if a project is on the current DFP, we do want you to do a BG1. But if you want to refresh your memory, just go review the appropriate section under 160 and it will explain which projects need BG1s.
And John, that's our only question. Thank you.
All right, so no questions out there. We'll give y'all just a few seconds to try to chime in if there's any other questions out there. But otherwise, Gary, Greg, Tanisha, Oksana, do you all have anything to add, subtract?
All I want to add is that the person that requested a copy of the presentation, it was already sent to her. So I sent that earlier today, and it will be posted on the KDE website within 2 to 3 business days. We usually get that up there.
Yes, and I think we typically at the beginning of this presentation, there's one slide, and I think I may have just forgot to put it in there where we try to show you where that is on the KDE website. But if you go to facilities, there's a section, Oksana, what's it called? Do you know off the top of your head? If you
Pretty
go
sure
on to
it's
the facilities section, there's one that talks about webinars that you can click on, and the most recent one's at the very top. And the two previous presentations that we've done would be just directly under those. They're listed in the most recent to the one farthest back on that particular page.
That's correct. And in addition, once they're up there already, I also send an email out just letting them know that it's already available for viewing.
And if you leave this presentation and you have a question on how to get to any of those, just feel free to call us. We'll get you there one way or another. Anybody else? All right, I have jibber jabbered for everybody for the last hour. I think we're going to call it. Thank you all for your time. I hope this was beneficial for your needs when you get to dealing with your district facility plan and getting your LPC started. I hope that you found that this was some insightful information to go through your process. I encourage you to call your uh, project manager once or here at KDE once you get your part two. If you've got any questions before you present that to your LPC, we would be happy to explain any details for you as you prepare to show that from your perspective. Again, part two is district specific information. It's a slide presentation. There's not an audio version of it, so we're not the ones presenting it, but this information, part of this presentation today is to try to explain what this information is, the importance of it, and to kind of guide you through what you can do to utilize this information through that process. So when you get your information, if you have a question, feel free to call the project manager that what would have worked on that for your district, and so that you can more accurately present that to your LPC and your school board. And with that, thank you all very much.